Hey, superachievers! This episode is part of a very special series I have curated for you. Your level of emotional intelligence is one of the most significant contributors to your success in life, however you choose to define success for you. In my emotional intelligence workshops, I use the EQI 2.0 model to help professionals and leaders assess how they are doing in self-perception, self-expression, interpersonal relationships, decision-making, and stress management, the main areas of the model. The model contains 15 competencies grouped into each of the areas I just mentioned. You can learn more about the model at mhs.com. So what is so special about this series? Each episode is a deep dive into a competency from the model with an expert who provides you with strategies for improving your emotional intelligence. In this episode, Roger Hall shares the importance of effective stress management to your emotional intelligence. Roger is a business psychologist, speaker, and author of the book, Staying Happy, Being Productive: The Big 10 Things Successful People Do. Welcome, Roger. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, I'm grateful to be here. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad you're joining us again. You joined us for a previous Quit Bleeping Around episode, but today we're going to focus on emotional intelligence and in particular, stress management, the composite within the whole EQI 2.0 model. But before we get into that, can you share a little bit about your background?
Yeah, I'm Dr. Roger Hall. I'm a business psychologist. I do executive coaching, leadership development with entrepreneurs, business owners, and professionals. I have been doing that I've been a licensed psychologist since 1991, so I've seen a few things.
Just a few. Nice. So now, stress management. This is a huge topic, especially in the last few years. So I'm sure most people know exactly somewhat at least, what stress management is, but how can you tell us about stress management in relation to emotional intelligence?
Sure. If we look at some research by a guy named Roy Baumeister, he talks about a thing called ego depletion, and what he says is we have just a limited supply of self-control, and so if we're spending all of our time resisting the stress in our life, we don't have any mental margin left to be emotionally intelligent. So if I'm busy fighting fires because I'm freaking out, I'm stressed out, I'm overwhelmed, then I don't have the mental reserve, the decisional capacity to regulate myself. And so much of emotional intelligence is monitoring yourself, self-awareness, and controlling yourself, self-management. So if I'm busy fighting these fires, I can't do those things. So I'm going to come across wrong. I'm going to say things I don't want to say, or maybe I want to say, but normally my editing function works. So it really is that balance of this limited capacity of our brain. So the better we play defense, and I really view stress management as a defensive strategy. And then there are other, what I would consider offensive strategies to get happy.
I love that idea. And we need to make sure people tune into your happiness episode too.
Well, that would be
those
all
lines.
Right.
So there's a preview, folks. So along those lines with stress management, the composite within the EQI 2.0 model. So we kind of already have an idea of what it looks like for someone not, properly regulating that. The no filter. I love that, right? Because it does happen, doesn't it?
It does happen. Yeah.
Yeah. So what are some ways that we can work on that if we're low in this whole area?
Well, there are probably three different pathways to stress. There's environmental stress, which is bad weather, crowding, noise, all the things in our external environment. There's physiological stress, illness, injury, disease of some sort. And then there's the last, which is our thought life, which is stress created by what we think. Now, we can have environmental stress. We can have to deal with a rattlesnake or be chased by a bear, but most people don't deal with that every day. We can have hurricanes. We can have tornadoes. We can have earthquakes. But most of what we're dealing with in terms of stress is how we think about things. So if my boss comes in and says, I need to see you in the conference room at 11:30, Jan from HR will be there as well.
Uh-oh.
Okay, so what you start doing is you start creating this scenario in your head, and that scenario then creates this physiological reaction, just like you're being chased by a bear.
Yeah.
Now, if you're being chased by a bear, you're going to be running, you're going to be fighting. Probably fighting is not a good idea. And actually running is not a good idea either.
Depends on the bear, right? No, I'm kidding.
So all of that will use up all the chemistry that your body builds up in the fight, flight, or freeze reaction. When you're at work and you've got a meeting you're nervous about, you're not going to be running, you're not going to be fighting, but you'll be stewing in all that activity, or all that chemistry with no activity. So the way our body is built is it's built for movement under stress. And most of us are very sedentary in our lives. And in our stress lives, we're really sedentary. So there we are in our office, at our desk, worried about what's going to happen. So and let's say you go to the meeting, right? And everything's fine, okay? You still got all the chemistry going. So then you go to lunch and your body is still in that fight or flight mode. Well, that shuts down your digestive system. It shuts down your immune system. And so you're more vulnerable to illness. You're going to have digestive problems. We actually see that 80% of what physicians treat in their offices are stress-related illnesses. So irritable bowel syndrome, ulcerative colitis, migraine headaches, all kinds of heart disease, high cholesterol, some kinds of cancer, all of which are stress-related illnesses. So how do you resolve that? Well, first is to discipline your thinking. So a big piece of emotional intelligence is monitoring your thoughts and emotions and then managing your thoughts and emotions. So the first part is you've got to stick a bucket into that stream of consciousness in your head and find out what's happening in your head all the time. And you're going to sample that stream of consciousness, and you know what you're going to find? That bucket is full of garbage. Yeah. And so then the self-control, the managing your thinking is you have to learn how to, once you've stopped your thought, then replace that trash thought with a more productive, accurate thought. So that's the first thing. And then see how you feel. But in terms of practical tactics, you've got all this chemistry. How do you get rid of all this chemistry? You go exercise. Now, you don't have to, you don't have to join a gym if you don't want to. If you do want to, knock yourself out. But at lunch, right after that meeting with HR and your boss, you should be going for a walk, because if you go eat a hamburger, your stomach is not ready for that. And it's going to sit in your stomach like a brick. So go exercise, work all that excess chemistry out so that you can feel better. So, my number one recommendation for stress management is physical activity. Even if it's just walking your dog, that's awesome. Unless maybe it's a tiny little dog and you only have to walk around your yard.
Pick them up and run with them. No.
Yeah, that is fine.
I love that. So it's using the mind to help ease the body, and then using the body to help ease the mind. Tackling it from two different ways.
Yeah, ever since Descartes said there's our mind which is separate from our body, Westerners have been believing that these two things are not related.
Yeah.
I mean, nothing. There's a book by a neuroscientist called Descartes' Error, because we really are one in the same, and that if I've got something going on in my body, it's going to affect my brain, which affects my thinking. And, my brain runs everything else. All of this is a handy carrying case for my brain, which makes us who we are.
Yeah. I love that. So now there are 3 subscales within this composite. Can you give a little overview of that and maybe a little bit of the interplay between them?
Sure. So one of them is optimism. Optimism is the propensity to see the positive. Now, people who are not optimistic say, that's Pollyanna. And by the way, if you ever read the book Pollyanna, what you'll see is that the character is actually engaging in what cognitive therapists called reframing. So she's doing this cognitive reframing. She's not all, if you really look at it carefully, she's not, oh, everything's happy, everything's good.
Delusional.
She's trying to find something positive in a bad situation without denying the negative, which is an important part of rational restructuring, which is a significant component of cognitive therapy. But I talk to people who are pessimists, and they always say this: I'm not a pessimist, I'm a realist. You know what you know what the difference between a pessimist and a realist is?
Ooh,
nothing. Nothing. Because pessimists are more realistic than optimists. Optimists will always overestimate how much they can get done, the likelihood of things turning out well. They're wrong more often than pessimists, but they live longer, healthier, happier lives with more friends. And so, I mean, I actually asked a pessimist this once. I said, you see the benefits. You'll live longer, you'll be happier, you'll have better health, and you'll have more friends. Or you'll be right a little bit more often. Which do you want to be? And he said, I want to be right more often.
Oh,
okay.
No.
I mean, that's fine. That's fine. Optimists are wrong a little bit more often than pessimists, but they have all these side benefits. So if you're a pessimistic person, that's the cognitive style that goes with the emotions related to depression. So when we look at people who are unhappy, they tend to be excellent pessimists. I mean, they're probably right about a lot of things, but that doesn't mean they're right about everything. And people who are pessimists go, well, I don't really know how to change. And there's an author that I really admire. His name is Martin Seligman, and he's probably the father of positive psychology. He's a self-professed pessimist, and he said, you can learn how to be optimistic. So he has a book, Learned Optimism. So if you're a pessimist and you want to learn how to be optimistic, there's a book that can teach you the ways to be more optimistic. So that's the first subscale. The second one is stress tolerance, which is how well can you handle stress without collapsing?
Yeah.
And there's a little bit of research that suggests that some people are genetically wired for better stress tolerance. And you're thinking, well, I know I don't, if you're a pessimist, I know I don't got that gene. What we know is that you can practice stress tolerance and become more stress tolerance. And you've probably heard a lot about the concept of resilience, which if we think about fragility, and I have I have an egg on this bookshelf and it falls to the ground, it'll break. That's a fragile thing. A tennis ball is resilient. If it drops off my shelf, it'll bounce and it'll return to its original form. And so that's a very important concept. But then there's this added concept that comes from a guy who I think coined the term. His name is Nassim Taleb, and he's a mathematician. He's kind of a grumpy guy, but he's really, really smart. And he uses this term called anti-fragile. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with that.
I'm not.
But what he argues is that human beings are anti-fragile. We're not just resilient. We get better because of stress. So if you know anything about pottery, what's the first thing you do with the clay before you put it on the wheel? Do you know anything about this?
I don't know.
You slam it against the table over and over again. And that, it knocks out the air bubbles, which makes it so that it's better for what you're going to do. And human beings are anti-fragile, meaning that we become stronger through adversity. Yes. Again, it's Nassim Taleb. He's a mathematician. He's a financier and just generally a really, really smart guy. But I love this concept of anti-fragile. Yeah. And I think so human beings, we're built that way. The more stresses we have, the stronger we become. So that's stress tolerance. If you want to read about resilience, there's an author named Savatorre Maddi and Deborah Casaba. Resilience at Work is one of their books. And unfortunately, Dr. Maddi passed away this last year, but he's done a whole career on the concept of hardiness. And it's essentially identical to resilience. And he said people who are resilient, they have a full commitment to life, the 3 C's. Of course, you got to have everything with the same letter.
Of course.
So they're committed, okay? They're engaged in life. They believe they have control over their situation, not that they're a victim of their circumstances. And then the last piece is that when bad things happen, they don't view it as a punishment, like Zeus is on Mount Olympus throwing lightning bolts at them. They view it as a challenge. So it's commitment, challenge, and control. And those are his 3 things. So if you want to boost your resilience, all of those are cognitive strategies, things that you can change your thinking about. And again, he's a great resource. The book Anti-Fragile, it's a bit academic, but it's a really good book about that concept. And then the last subscale is flexibility. And flexibility is your ability to adapt on the fly to changes in your environment. And there's a personality inventory called the NEO-PIR or the Big Five. I don't know if you've heard of the Big Five personality factors. One of those is called openness to experience. So you can be open to experience or closed to experience. Flexible or rigid. And one of the things I see is that under stress, people tend to tighten up and they become a little bit more cognitively rigid. And part of that's because as you're adapting to changing circumstances, our brain narrows our focus to what's immediately in front of us. And we're not open to possibilities. And some of that's adaptive. Like if you're running away from a bear, you don't need to be thinking about, math problems or poetry or anything
What's
like that.
What's for dinner?
No, because you could be dinner, right? So you need to narrow in. Well, when you're having a conversation at work or with somebody in your family, or you spend too much time on the internet, you're consuming so much information that that information overload is actually creating stress and narrowing your flexibility. So one of the ways that you can become more stress tolerant to deal with stress management is have time of quiet reflection. And so very often the people I work with are really, really active. They're really, really productive. And so they think, I don't want to spend 15 minutes doing nothing. It's boring. And what good will that do me? And our brains actually need that time to rest and recover. And our most creative ideas come in that time of quiet reflection. There's a set of brain circuitry called the default mode network. And that's the place our brain goes when we're not thinking about a task. And our brain is actually more active when our mind is wandering. Now, unfortunately, many of us, when we get into that mind wandering mode, we start down the worry loop and the negative thinking. And if you can discipline your thinking, and it takes practice, you can change that worry loop into the kind of expansive thinking that you do in the shower when these ideas come to you. So that's also the default mode network. When our mind is kind of wandering and these creative solutions come to us and you go, oh, wow. Our brain needs that time of rest for creativity, to think about our relationships with our loved ones, to think about our future. So taking that time of quiet reflection each day. And if you're not very good at it, start with 5 minutes. And if you're not good at 5 minutes, then start with 1 minute.
Something.
But I mean, what I do is I sit with a cup of coffee and I look out my window. People experience this if they're watching a fireplace, watching the flames, wave back and forth, or if you're at the beach watching the waves come in, and it puts you in this contemplative, meditative state. So
I'm just getting relaxed thinking about it.
Well, those are some things you can do to help with your stress management. So time of quiet reflection, exercise, thought monitoring and thought management, all of those things will help you be more stress tolerant.
I love it. Now, the other thing I love about the EQI 2.0 model is so we don't get grades, essentially, right? We don't get the A. We haven't arrived if we, score in the 90 to 130 on the EQI. So with that said, sometimes we can score too high and overuse some of these skills, sub-skills, components. So what does that look like if we're overusing stress management?
Well, there are some people who are like, I can't handle this. And so they shut everything down. And they'll essentially retreat from the world in attempt to eliminate all stress from their life. That's a really bad solution. And
yes.
if we look, there's a curve that looks like an upside down bowl. And on one side, on one axis is performance or anxiety or stress. And on the y-axis is performance. And what we see is if you have no stress, you have no performance. And then if you have a moderate level of stress, you have very high performance. And then too much stress, you have low performance again. And people think, I don't want to have any stress in my life. No. I mean, then you're laying on the couch and staring at the ceiling and you're not productive. Everybody needs a little bit of stress. Do you remember the biosphere out in Tucson?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So
something weird happened with that, right?
Well, there's a lot of weird things that happen with that, but it's a completely self-contained ecosystem, and they put these trees, acacia trees, in there in part of their savanna room. Okay, well, acacia trees are a very hardy, sturdy tree, and then they locked the scientists in there for, I think it was a couple years. And the top branches of the acacia trees kept breaking and falling to the ground. And they were wondering why that was. And so, because they got nothing else to do in this giant, bubble, they started looking at these acacia tree cells, and they found that the cells were not as the cell walls were not as thick in these acacia trees as they were in the wild. And the acacia tree was actually breaking off under its own weight.
Wow.
Why was that? Plenty of sunlight, plenty of water, no wind.
Yeah. Wow.
The trees need the stress of the wind in order to grow to their full potential and to be strong enough to support their own weight. So the overuse of stress management is elimination of all stress, which prevents you from being successful and reaching your full potential.
I love that. So essentially, we need to be grateful for the medium stresses that we have in our lives.
Yeah. And that's what helps us perform. That's what helps us do our jobs. If we have deadlines, if we have things that are a little bit hard to do, all of that makes us better people.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Now, before we get to your final piece of advice in this area, can you share a little bit about your products and/or services?
Yeah. So I again do executive coaching, leadership development for entrepreneurs, business owners, and professionals. I also have an online course called Freak Out, Fear Less, Live More, that I created to help people who are trying to manage their anxiety, their freak outness, their stress, and to live a more purposeful life. And that's at freakoutcourse.com. I have a book called Staying Happy, Being Productive that looks exactly like that. And people can find that at stayinghappybeingproductive.com. And you can find out about me at my website, which is drrogerhall.com, drrogerhall.com.
Awesome. Thank you. Now, your
Thank
final
you.
piece of advice for our listeners on stress management.
It's a point I haven't made before earlier today. So we talked about exercise, time of quiet reflection. But the number one thing you can do to make yourself better able to manage stress is get a good night's sleep.
Yes.
Your mom was right. You need 8 hours of sleep. And so if I was to leave you with one thing, work on that habit.
I love it. Yeah, I protect my sleep like nobody's business.
That's awesome.
Thank you for joining us today, Roger.
Thank you, Chris. I'm grateful to be here.
To learn more about Roger, visit his website at drrogerhall.com.